Okay, we are getting ready. All right. We are live now. All right, good evening, everybody watching on Facebook. We are coming to you live to talk to you a little bit tonight, just have a conversation about voting history. And I am very excited to be joined by these wonderful panelists, Ruby Bailey, who is the executive editor at the Columbia Missourian for a while now, until she is not. Mary Ratliff, who is the president of the NAACP of Columbia, and Marilyn McLeod. She is the president of the League of Women Voters of Missouri. And of course, we have Brianna Lennon. And Brianna, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the office that you hold.
Thank you. And we are really excited to have this panel today. This really kicks off our voter education themes for the summer. So I should have said, I'm the county clerk for Boone County, which means that my office is the one that's responsible for administering elections in Boone County, recruiting poll workers, training poll workers, getting everything set up for elections and things like that. And so we wanted to make sure 2020 was such a big year and there was so much participation, so much attention paid to elections. We wanted to continue on that theme of educating voters and providing people with the opportunity to ask questions. It was an unusual year with 2020 being a pandemic, so our normal in-person events that we would have had didn't really happen. So we're now continuing on to have these webinars and try to answer any questions that voters have and just provide some interesting and good information for anybody that is just interested in elections and voting. I know that it's a really hot topic right now, and we've been doing other panels. Last week, our office was with Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft and the Cooper County Clerk Sarah Herman to talk about things. So this is our contribution as a county office to provide information and good resources for voters that want to get more involved. So this is our first one about voting history, and we really appreciate everybody that's involved and our panelists for agreeing to do this in this unorthodox way. So I'm really excited for this conversation tonight.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brianna. Thank you for asking me to host, and thank you for putting me in the room with these amazing women that I know have a lot to share on this subject. So I am going to just ask the first question and feel free to jump in and answer. And also, I think it'd be nice if you just said a little bit about yourself before you answer the first question. Just give a little bit of background on yourself. So let me give the first question. So voting rights have evolved a lot from the first Constitution, and we didn't really reach full legal suffrage until after the Civil Rights Act in 1965. What were some of the challenges to voting that have improved or changed since that time?
Well, I guess I'll start. Marilyn McLeod. I'm with the League of Women Voters, which is an organization that's been around now 101 years. Came out of the women's suffrage movement. And women spent more than 70 years trying to get the right to vote. And of course, we know not all women got that right to vote, just like we know American history is filled with very sad background. But one of the things that came after the Civil Rights Act was moving the age of voters from 21 to 18. And that followed the time of the Vietnam War. So that enlarged the number of people eligible to vote. So that was, a major shift that followed the Voting Rights Act. If that's the kind of thing that you were thinking of with your question, that's just one aspect of things that happened. So it let young people, college age people, or, certainly adults who were younger able to vote. The thought was, if they could be drafted to go to war, why shouldn't they be able to vote? So that was just one thing.
Hello, my name is Mary Ratliff, and I am president of the Columbia NAACP, a part of a national organization that is now little over 111 years old. And part of the things that we've been doing, one of our main priority always has been civil rights, and voting rights was a very integral part of that. And so some of the things that have happened over the years, the inclusion of poll taxes and property taxes and all of those kinds of things were challenges in the old days as far as voting was concerned, and African Americans were not. They were prohibited from voting many times by such tests as, how many bubbles in a bar of soap, how many jelly beans in a jug, and that sort of thing, along with, the property taxes and all those other things. There were all of these challenges, and many of those things. The Civil Rights Act of '65 changed a lot of those things.
All right, thank you for that. So we're going to go to the next question. So what's one part of our modern history of voting rights as a country that you think is often forgotten or not well known? So something that is often forgotten or not well known. For example, the federal government didn't require every state to do postcard voter registration cards until 1993. So what's one part of our modern history of voting rights as a country that you think is often forgotten or not well known? I didn't even know that fact. So
I did not either. That was news to me. Yeah. Well, what we called motor voter came into being in the 90s, where if you went to get a driver's license, the driver's license bureaus were enabled to register you to vote. So it was, as people go to get their license, they should be asked the question, are you registered to vote? And then if not, they should be offered that opportunity from that spot. So it just gives another access to, being able to register to vote.
Absolutely.
Yeah. People may not know that was, a law that came into being.
Hello, everybody. I did not answer on the last question, so I'm going to introduce myself now. My name is Ruby Bailey. I am the executive editor at the Columbia Missourian, and I am a professor at the J School. And long before that, though, I was a reporter. And so I covered lots of issues around voter issues, especially since 2000. I was in Florida in Miami during the 2000 hanging Chad and all that good stuff. So a lot of what I think about in terms of contemporary history actually comes from that year, because we really think about, I think, hanging Chad was something that wasn't in our language, right? It is now in ways that we may never forget. But it was the first time, at least, that I saw a real move toward talking about voter fraud versus or over voter suppression and voter disenfranchisement, right? Because there was a lot of voter disenfranchisement in Florida, here, and in several states and in cities where there are predominantly Black populations. There were a lot of ways in which voters were disenfranchised, but it was not framed in that way. The narrative was more framed around voter fraud. And that's when we really kind of started to see The things that are in place today that are coming to fruition today, I think they started back then during that particular election, and happy to talk more about that, but don't want to monopolize everything either.
That's good.
Well, Ruby, I was interested. I mean, I don't, I mean, this is just a conversation and I'm interested. I want to hear the story because I remember that so well. The hanging chads, which, you know, I didn't even know it was called a chad, you know, like just the things that you don't know. But once the media gets a hold to it, you know, it becomes part, like you said, of our everyday language. So if you don't mind, I would love to hear more about it.
Oh, sure. I don't mind at all. So obviously in 2000, there was the George W. Bush versus Al Gore, and it came down at that point to Florida. There were about 1,600 votes that George W. Bush was up by, right? And so I was a reporter in Detroit at the time, sent to cover part of what was going on in Florida. And I followed the NAACP hearings almost every day. And so what I heard was a lot of stories from Democrats, Black and white, Democrats who talked about voter intimidation tactics, where on the utility poles, there were signs that said, "Are you a felon? This area is under surveillance." Or "Is there a warrant out for your arrest? This area is under surveillance." People who had just been removed from the voting rolls, and they thought they had no recourse, and they were never informed. They didn't know what their recourse was. People who they just disappeared from the rolls. People whose polling places had been moved, and they had no advance warning those polling places were moved, and they knew nothing about it. So by the time, obviously this went to the Supreme Court, right? And as they were accounting, trying to figure out who voted for whom with the Chad. I think Black leadership, including the NAACP, was very well aware, right? And were beginning to document the intimidation that took place during polling stations. Highway patrolmen who had set up checkpoints on the road leading from Black suburbs to a polling station. There were just tons of things that police were questioning Black voters on their way to the polls about their criminal records. There were just tons of things that were happening, right? That were seemingly efforts to suppress what they thought would be Democratic votes. And they looked at Black folks and figured they were going to vote heavily Democratic. And then also with that, a lot of folks in Florida lost their right to vote as ex-convicts and convicts, right? They had lost their right to vote in Florida at that point because of the laws there in terms of voting rights being restricted from those privileges being taken from felons and ex-felons for life. And I think probably most of us know that that's really just kind of a hangover from the 1800s, where to keep African Americans from voting, because Black men were more likely to end up in prison for doing things like, loitering. So we're more than likely to have a police record and could be sent to prison for a felony. Therefore, you weren't going to get to vote, right? So we kind of know where most of these tactics come from. But interestingly, for Missouri, especially that same night, right, John Ashcroft was running for Senate, and the gentleman he was running against had passed away. And he technically lost that election, right? He lost to the I forget the gentleman's name, so I don't want to just say the dead gentleman. Whoever he was. Thank you. Yes, he had passed away, I think, a couple of weeks before or something.
Yeah, he was in an accident.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Right. Yeah.
Good save. Okay, so he passed away. So Mr. Ashcroft had lost that particular election. Well, of course, despite the voter disenfranchisement, which both was documented by the Civil Rights Commission and by the federal government, where if they said that they declared the win for George Bush by 537 votes, they estimated that about 12,000 people were taken off the rolls who were likely Gore voters who should not have been taken off the rolls. And they couldn't give an exact estimate for the number of felons, but they extrapolated some numbers and figured that people who had been called felons who were not, right? There were about 4,000 of those. Okay, so word had gotten back apparently to the Gore campaign that there was some things going on in St. Louis where voters were also going through the same things. So they got a court order to keep the polls open longer. The polls stayed open approximately an extra 45 minutes before another court overruled that, shut it down, right? So they're estimating that about 45 people voted. Now, this is the Ashcroft case, right? So he lost. Now, for Al Gore, and I want people to understand the names and why I'm bringing up these names and why this matters. For the recount, you know the name Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz was on George W. Bush's recount attorney commission, whatever they called it, right? One of the now Supreme Court justices, right?
Right.
Was right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, was on that committee,
Yeah.
right? Justice Roberts.
And Roberts. Okay.
Yes. And then and so then we have Mr. Ashcroft. A couple months after Mr. Ashcroft lost, George W. Bush appointed him or named him to the U.S.
Attorney
General's office. Thank you, U.S. Attorney. So he's U.S. Attorney General, and you begin to see some of that rollback of some of the laws and protections for voters, right, who've been disenfranchised under the umbrella of voter fraud. Right, which is what he alleged was happening somehow in his campaign in St. Louis, but was never necessarily proven. You see in 2013, the Supreme Court decision in which Justice Roberts was the lead writer, and how can I forget these justices' names? He's still on the Supreme Court. Forgive me, it's gonna come to me in a minute, I'm gonna scream it out, in which he was the lead justice on this case that gutted provisions within the Voting Rights Act. It's important that we see these things and that we understand the patterns of these things, because this just comes back around, right? And so we see now more efforts to suppress based on alleged voter abuse when there is no evidence of voter abuse, and there doesn't have to be, because they've been able to do this without proof, based on a couple of Supreme Court decisions, that you don't have to have the proof. You can assert voter fraud, and that's it, right? There's very little proof for it. So long story short, I don't even know how I got started, but long story short, it's important that we see these ties, because this is how these things start, and this is how they continue on. And so we should not be surprised as we continue toward other elections, as they come up, as the election comes up again, for whether it's the president or what have you. We cannot be surprised when we see these things start over and over again, and we hear these buzzwords. And it's why it's very important. And I'm so appreciative for the work that Brianna does, and just educating people about their rights and their privileges to vote, and making sure your address is correct, and making sure you can get your ID or whatever it is that you need in plenty of time, because these are the things, whether they're intentional or not. And it's hard for me to imagine that some of these are not, right? Suppress people's rights to vote.
Missouri has had several, over and over again, actually, attempts to, we have one of the most, and Brianna, you can correct me, but we have a pretty antiquated election system, because each state has its own rules. So ours is very limited. For example, when we hear about some other states with mail ballots, we have only our absentee ballots, and you can only do there's only certain reasons that you can do it, and there's a whole procedure. It's very, very limited. But there are still attempts to force us as a state to have very limited, for example, voter ID, very strict voter ID. So multiple times in the last, since at least 2006, the legislature has passed laws to have only strict voter ID, which would make our elections even more restricted than they currently are. But they keep getting struck down by the courts, thankfully. But they tried it again this year, and the session ended before they could do it. But again, there's this story about voter fraud when there is apparently no proof of that. It's just kind of a myth And, this belief like everybody should have an ID. Well, everybody does show some form of ID when they vote. So it's right here, just exactly what you said.
Samuel Alito, Justice Alito was the one that George W. Bush appointed. I knew it would come to me. Thank you, God. I knew it would come to me. And to your point, Marilyn, you're absolutely, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to somehow make. I guess our task, our job, is to somehow make voter registration more attractive. We've got to work at that, and so it's going to be up to us to come up with creative ways and which to appeal to our voters, especially to our young people out there. So we've got a lot of work cut out for us to do to make the changes that we need to make in this voter registration process. One of the things that we push for in NAACP is to make sure that the inmates that are coming out of prison who sometimes have not have a felony, who does not still on felony probation, we have to make sure that they know that they can vote. They don't know that. They don't know that, and one of the things that we should be doing, we should be pushing for a law that when they are being let out on probation, that they be given all of their rights, that they know what their rights are, that they know that those that have the right to vote and those that don't. We need to be. That's our job, to make sure that our legislators put something in place to maybe assure that happens. Because when I hit the community out here, that's many times some of the things that I've shared this before, that many times we take a lot of people with us on our voter registration drive. Well, I know, just if I don't know the people in Columbia and the African American community, they know me. And so when I go into the areas like the parks and that sort of thing, and we take people with us, a lot of times they will just say, they'll ask them to register to vote, and they'll say, don't want to,
Mm-hmm.
because they know me and I know them, they know of me, even if they don't know me. And I go up to them and I say, yeah, I'm not going to let you get away with not voting, and those sorts of things. I laugh, talk, joke with them and say, I'm not leaving you till you sign this thing. And then one of them inevitably will whisper to me, we can't vote. And I said, and one day in particular, I remember I was up on Trinity, and there were a group of guys sitting out playing cards, bunches, yard full of them. And I did know one of them, and somebody else had gone up to talk to them to ask them to register, and they said, we don't want to vote. We don't want to register. When I went up to chastise them for not voting because of talking about some particular issues, then the one that I knew just whispered to me, we can't vote. We can't. Why can't you vote? Because I've been in prison. And I go, are you on probation? Are you on paper? He goes, no. And I say, then you can vote. Did you commit a felony? No, then you can vote. And so then he told all of his friends, and then we got 5 or 6 folks registered right there. They had no idea that nobody had told them that they could vote. So we've got to make sure that we get those, we try our best to get those words out to all of the community. So those are things that we can do in our community everywhere we go. And Brianna, I'm suggesting that to you too. Everywhere we go, just let people know that if you're not on paper, that you can vote, and you're not a felon. If you're not on paper, you can vote. And so we've got a lot of people out there that fit into that category.
Mary, I'm glad that you brought that up. Actually, our office has made new graphics, like flyers that we had posted in our office and offered to give to the probation and parole office, just letting them know, like, hey, we're here when you're done with your papers and you've been discharged, that you can come in and register to vote. And so we've been trying to get that information out there as well. If I know anybody personally who is finishing or discharging, I always make sure I let them know, please come and get registered to vote. Don't forget about us. you know, you have these rights are restored to you, please come and do this. And so I think it's just all going to start with word of mouth. Tell somebody to tell somebody else, and then they'll tell somebody else to just try to break that, because I've gotten that a lot too, believing that once you're a felon you can't vote anymore. So I do my part and try to do that and let them know. That brings me to like one of my questions that I had for the panel. Do you feel like there's anything that we can do to increase that civic engagement? So example, like maybe more flyers, more brochures in certain places, more public events. Like, what do you think would be good to increase that civic engagement?
Well, one of the,
Sorry,
go
Mary,
ahead.
you go first.
I was going to say, one of the things, I really have a civic engagement directory here. We worked, and from in the 2000 election, I brag about it, I keep bragging about it. We, the NAACP here in Columbia, registered more people than anybody in the NAACP percentage-wise, okay? Percentage-wise. And we did that because at the time I was state conference president, and we did have Bill and Melinda Gates gave us some money, you know, to be able to do that. And so I hired Reverend Donald Ray McNeil and Reverend Linda Dodd as the two people that I sent out, and we had, you know, we got them an office, and we set them up, and we sent them out to all the schools. We sent them out all across the state of Missouri to get into those schools, to get into those cities, to go every place. And we registered these people, and that's what it's going to. It really does take some resources, and there are people out there that provide some of those resources. But we were able to do that because I could pay somebody to, you know, they have to have a job, and I have to pay some people to drive across, and I have to pay for their gas and that sort of stuff to drive to down in southeast Missouri and all those places. But we have to do it. We have to hit all of those places where people have, you know, historically voted down in southeast Missouri and up all over. And so we did that, and we need to do, and that's what, you know, I shared with our people. That is we're going. That's why we working to raise the funds for ourselves, and hopefully somebody will come through and help us out with that. But we want to do that kind of thing again because we showed, you know, we got the national award for doing it. We are happy about that, and we showed that you can do it if you're willing to get out there and do it. And I had expectation for my people, and I got a, you know, voter engagement manual here that directs us, and I can't take credit for it because it was really developed by our national office, by our national engagement officer, you know, that got it to us, but we implemented it and made it work here in Missouri. So in 2002, we haven't worked that hard or done it again since then, but we're right now at a point where we need to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I would also add to Mary's point, I think a couple of things. One, is really important that, and we can use the contempt, what's going on now to do this, that we help younger folks and people who don't typically vote to understand the importance of voting in each and every election, and understanding that the people who vote, that the importance of voting for the state representatives and all those things, how that impacts each and everything that happens right at the state level. So a lot of what we're seeing now in terms of this really big resurgence of states' rights, so to speak, and which states are really honing in on the so-called voter fraud issues. Those people were elected, right, to do what they do. And so if that's not what you want, right, that's not the kind of representation you want, it's extraordinarily important for you to come out to vote. Same thing with city council, same thing with whatever other school board, whatever other elected officials. If there are certain things that you feel are not being represented, or certain things that they just need to know that it impacts them in ways they really don't necessarily think about all the time sometimes, because the hustle is real. They're trying to do some other things. They're trying to, they're trying to just make it from day to day. I get that. But if we do things in a way that is a one-off, where it's okay, it's time for you to vote, it may feel more extractive, right? We come to you only when we want something. We want you to get on the rolls. We want you to vote for this candidate. But if, kind of some of the work that Mary's doing, some of the work that Brianna's doing, that makes it just a more natural, free-flowing, always available conversation, no matter what time of year, right? Not just before right before an election. People, hopefully, will get just more of a sense of this particular right that they have, and this particular responsibility and privilege that they have, and why, if you don't see yourself represented on the school board or on city council, that you really may be able to do something about that, right? So the importance of stressing local elections, as well as the state, as well as the national, and just kind of showing people, how they all tie together in the way that we live, and in the ways that people, in the ways that people are affected by everything from roll carts to voter laws and all of that. So
I couldn't agree more, Ruby. Well, it's true. I think people don't realize it. It's sort of ephemeral, the government and voting. But, you mentioned roll cards, things like that. It sort of gets people's attention, or, their utility bills, or their anything that's related to government, the roads. If there's potholes, suddenly they realize, oh, wait a minute, there's a government that takes care of it. I'm mad now. But they need to be thinking ahead, and how we can ingrain that in people, that it's their government. They need to take an interest and be wise in their election, when they vote for people, to use their vote wisely. Yeah.
And we also start telling people, in our, it's good to tell people in our community that because they come to us with everything, and I say, if you don't vote, then you don't have the right to come and talk to me about what did or did not happen. So if you didn't vote, you can lie to me and tell me you did, but don't tell me that you didn't vote. Some of the people go, I didn't vote. No, don't tell me that you didn't vote. Then you want me to work on the issue, and I don't care if it's local, because everything begins locally. Because, and I'm looking at David Smith as an example, because of the fact that he worked here in Columbia. The fact that when his name came up for recommendations for the position that he now holds, it was easy for us to do it because he was working in the community. And so people need to understand that all politics is local, and and I look at people and what they're doing and what they have done before when they come and ask me to support them as office holder. I want to know if you've been involved in the community. Don't just decide that you're going to run for an office and then come in. Maybe you'll be a good one. I don't know, but I sure won't get the opportunity to know from recommending you, because if you haven't done anything in your home local community, then what makes me think that you would really represent me at the state or the national level? And we need to be putting people at the state level who are qualified to and have the opportunity to move up the ladder. So we need to be grooming them on the way up. We shouldn't just throw our friends, etc., in office. We need somebody who can be on the path to do some other things for us, because when we send folks to the city council, we are hoping that they are looking at a state representative job, and they're looking at that, a senator's job, and then on up the national chain. That's what we are trying to get. We need some well qualified, seasoned people. Right now, we really need seasoned people leading the effort, to make the changes that needs to be made in the society, because we are at, and I am not just saying this, we are at a very critical, crucial place in this society, and if we don't realize that, then we are in deep trouble.
So to piggyback off a little bit both what Ms. Mary and Ms. Ruby had said, given everything that we had to go through, with the Voting Rights Act 1965, do you think that us minorities have lost sight of the importance of voting, because I mean, it took a lot of hard work from generations of our past, you know, to even get this right. And so now there's just this lagging demographic of us who don't even get out and vote. Like, our people fought for this. You know, there were many bloody Sundays for this. Why forget now when we have this great opportunity? You can go look at your, like, all of the voting materials that you need is at your service here in Boone County. You have sample ballots. We have mail listings. Hey, you moved. Come see us, update your address so you can know where to go to vote. Like, so do you feel like that sight has been lost?
I think that, you know, some people, being a civil rights leader, and I handle complaints. I get them weekly with folks complaining that we have to go through processes. We have to go through processes with them. And I share with them that you have to keep, when you say, have we lost, we have to, we have to bring those people along. It's like church and everything else, is that I look at news and there's not much that go on that I don't know that's going on in the world, because I'm looking at news constantly. That's what I do all day, all night. You know, there are people that never look at a newspaper. There are people that never look at news. There are people, believe it or not, on election day, I have people close to my age, and the church will tell you that call me and say, Mary, who do I vote for? Yeah, we've been working on this for months. You know, we've been working on this, putting people out there so that you can see them, so you can decide who to vote for. So we have those of us who've been blessed for folks to allow us to lead. We have an awesome responsibility, and that's not to say you can do it yourself, because that's what I tell people about civil rights cases when they're working and folks treat them wrong. And I have to go over to get them their job back and all kinds of things, you know, and they'll say, oh, and I say, you could have done this yourself. You know, you could have done this yourself. There's a procedure, and you could have done, and that's the way it is with the voters. But because of the fact that I know that they don't know, and they don't feel confident enough that they can do it themselves, then for those of us who God has given the ability to be leaders, and folks allow us to be leaders, then we have to lead. You know, Dr. King had some very important people with him, some very learned people with him, but they needed a leader, and he had to lead. So we cannot shed our responsibility to lead, and we need to make sure that we are training people to stand on we have to leave some shoulders for people to stand on, so that when we are, because I'm getting old, you know, so that when I move out of the way, that's why my daughter and all her friends and stuff, they're in the NAACP, and I'm training them and I'm giving them responsibilities, because I need them to stay on the wall and get the job done, because those people that can do it for themselves do not know that they can do it for themselves. So we have to be, that's why there are leaders. There are leaders to tell people, yes, you can do it. And so we have to be able to, in our particular places that we sit, we have to be those leaders that are not afraid to step out there, you know, and do the leading that we need to do to get our people ready.
Thank you.
All right, I love it. Well, I have one more question for you guys. And this is probably a nice place to start tying this thing with a bow, because I think I heard some pieces as answers to this questions as you guys have been talking tonight. Why do you think it's important for people to know about the history of voting rights? Why is this even important? Why is this necessary?
Because you don't want to lose it. You know, as Mary was talking, all I could think was, if the right to vote is threatened for anyone, and certainly for minorities, which has been, American history's sad story. If there's a chance of losing that right to vote or any threat to it, that's an awakening. To me, that's time to wake up and say, we have to work to make sure that that doesn't happen. So even things that seem innocent, like I was talking about changes in the voting law to make it a little harder to vote because there's fraud, we have to fight to stop that together to be sure that the right to vote remains available to every eligible citizen. And I often think sometimes if there's a threat, it's more likely to energize people. Like we can't let that happen. So knowing the history has to help in that, because as Ruby Bailey's colleague, Kathy Kiley said, democracy is a fragile thing. So we have to realize that you can lose it at any time. And we just have to be sure that citizens take it seriously. And if you know about the history of voting rights in America, which was a very long struggle, and in fact, we're reversing things that happened that were benefits of Voting Rights Act and are now reversed. That's the time where we have to act together to be sure to preserve that right.
And I think that we in the African American community in particular, and I never let white America off either, because but I think that when we look back at the history, in fact, I was going through some of my literatures today, looking at some of the things that happened leading up through the civil rights of 1965 and on so forth. There were so many, in fact, I have a book here with many photographs, pictures in it, and those people felt so. The boys and those people felt so strongly about the right to vote that in New York, they took 900 children with them as they marched down the streets of New York with all of these, with all of these mamas and daddies and uncles and aunts and all of these people. They felt so strongly about it that they were putting their children out there to make sure that we had the right, that we were given the rights to vote, etc. And they did all of these things, and we stand on, and I think about, the 3 young men that were killed in Mississippi. I'm from Mississippi, and I remember it like yesterday. I didn't live that far from there, and I was very close to Money, Mississippi, where Emmett Till was killed, and remember that because he was close to my age, and that just really resonated with me, and so we had too many people. Medgar Evers shot in his driveway. Had the friend, his wife, a very good friend of mine that was chairman of the board when I served on the National Board of Directors. Wonderful, wonderful people, but killed in his driveway with his children, viewing him dying there in the driveway with them. Too many people shed too much blood, made too many sacrifices, and they thought that, and I think about, when we think about what we're going through, the things that we're going through now and the challenges that we have, it's nothing compared to what they had to go through. But they persevered and did it anyway because it was that important to them. And so I tell people, if voting rights was that important to those people that they were willing to, many of them knew they were going to die, but they were willing to do that. They were willing to make that sacrifice for me and for you, So, we would be remiss if we didn't do everything that we can do as a people to preserve the voting rights of people, because that determines how, because we can be, I remind everybody of the Reconstruction days, the Jim Crow days, when after the Civil Rights War, people were supposedly freed. They went to Congress as representatives and senators, African American folks, and pretty soon that was all turned back. That was all turned back, by those Jim Crow laws. They were allowed to let that happen. And if we don't stay vigilant as a people and as the friends of all of you, our friends, we can be right back in that predicament. So let's not forget that.
Yes, ma'am. To add on to what Mary's saying, because I think she's absolutely right.
Yeah.
The importance of history, certainly it tends to repeat itself sometimes. It's cyclical, right? And so if we can see the game as it's being played, if we can see what's coming, right, we would have greater opportunities to be able to offset that, right, or to stop it, or to at least, we don't have to be surprised as voters about, or as a group of people, about what's coming at us, or when we hear certain phrases, we'll go, okay, I've heard that before. The last time they tried this, XYZ. So it's, if we can teach people what the lessons that history offers, right, for us, in terms of the right to vote, why that vote is so powerful that they would want to keep it from you in the first place. It must be pretty powerful. It must be pretty important. What could possibly be so important about it, right? That you're with your vote, you have the possibility of changing the trajectory of your own life, your children's life, your grandchildren's life. And so even if you wouldn't vote for yourself, right, cast that vote for someone that you love, because these things matter. History shows us in no uncertain terms. But I also think that people might be a little put off by the word history, because when you think about history, we don't teach it in public schools. So the true and all-encompassing history of informally enslaved Africans in this country, indigenous people in this country, what's happened in terms of voting rights and in terms of anything, right? In terms of a lot of things, we have more, I think, now at our fingertips than we have in a long time. But people think history and they think, oh, white guys, right? Or what have you, right? But if they knew more about the history of African Americans taking control of their own narrative and determining their own future, and the ways in which they chose to do that included the vote, right? As well as it included on their own businesses and all of that. If they understood their history, right, and where voting went into their history, then perhaps, right, you get more folks who want to vote. That's my spiel.
Yeah.
Good.
They wouldn't want to take it away from you unless it was really valuable.
Right.
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 Yeah.
I feel like I hear this old saying in my head, like, if you don't know your foundation, how can you lay the rocks? Like, you have to know where it started. So to be able to build up, you got to know the bottom. You got to know the foundation of it. And that's what I think of when I think of why is history important. So,
That's a very good point. Very, very good point. There is a comment that came in on Facebook, and it's not so much a question, but I do want to read it because I think it's important. One issue that is difficult to overcome is clarity in ballot language, especially on issues. Anybody have any comments about that? Because I know sometimes on issues, propositions and this and that, it could get pretty dicey to understand whether you're voting for or against. Yes, no.
Right.
That's on purpose. That's on purpose. That is on purpose. There are people that want to distort the language of some of the acts and laws that are being put in place to confuse us. And it is our job to really go out there to say yes means no. Okay, that is our job. We have to do that. And I'm trying to think of what the Marilyn, do you remember which law it was we just had not very long ago?
Yeah.
When we had to
Last,
Yes, me
in
too.
November was Amendment 3, which reversed what was called Clean Missouri in 2018. And the first two lines of the ballot language sounded really good. Like it was a really great thing. So of course you'd vote yes, but that was not the meat of the ballot issue. It was really about the redistricting, which is the rest of the ballot issue, which was of course confusing. And so a lot of people thought, oh, this is great, I'll vote for it. So they literally reversed the good things that they had passed in 2018 because they didn't understand what was the ballot. But so the question about ballot language was very, very clear, meaning it was designed to actually fool people. So it was even worse than usual. Usually it's just like what you said, Mary, you know, where you vote yes if you mean no and no if you mean yes, but which sometimes does happen. But this one was actually written for this purpose, which was very sad to try to fool the public.
And I will say too, it's important. And one of the things that we try to do with the Missourian, and I think the Tribune also tries to do it in media outlets all over the country, a lot of times try very hard to explain. They have those voter guides, and those voter guides, they might seem a bit unwieldy, but really take a minute, take a Sunday, take whatever you need, go through and write, okay, so if I vote for that, that means whatever, right? Get with a group of your contemporaries and a couple of older folks, whatever. Just it is, you know, it can be daunting, but there are resources available to make sure that you understand very clearly what something means before you cast your vote.
Those are good points. I'm always appreciative of the work that goes into any organization or group or media outlet that will do something like what you just talked about, Ruby, in advance of an election, because it does help break it down kind of to layman's terms. Because a lot of times the language can definitely be confusing. So that was a really great comment and so true. So does anybody have any parting words? Brianna, would you like to wrap us up, or any parting questions or comments?
Well, I think I want to give everybody else an opportunity to impart parting words. I am again really grateful for this conversation, and I'm looking forward to our next set of them as well, because I think that they're really necessary conversations to have, and really appreciate everybody's willingness to participate.
I was extraordinarily grateful to Brianna when she asked me to do this, because I don't, you know, it's not necessarily, some people might think, well, she's an editor, she doesn't, you know, talk about these issues or blah, 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 but I do, and it is extraordinarily important. It's important, you know, to our entire democracy for obvious reasons. It's important to me as a journalist. I'm a grandma, I got 3 grandbabies, you know, it's important to us as a community, right? So I think anytime we can have these conversations, and we can share this, whether it's on Facebook, or we can, you know, we can have them one day, maybe again in a public space, that it's important that as many of us who can get together and just bring some perspective and just ask, you know, openly answer whatever questions we can to the best of our ability. I think it's really important that we do that, because I think we owe that, right, to the community that we all attempt to serve in the ways that we attempt to serve it. And so I really also want to thank Brianna, because at the J School, whenever our students ask to profile her, Brianna always says yes. And I know this semester alone, I have read at least 6 profiles in my class alone. I mean, like it's fabulous, because that's 6 separate kids now in my class alone. Then there are dozens of other classes that, you know, everybody says, oh yeah, we got 4 on Brianna. Thank you so much, Brianna. We all love you at the J School. But more importantly, to support what she's doing in the community, to try to make sure that people do know that they have the right to vote, that people are updating their addresses, that they are aware of what they need to take to the polling place, that if they have problems, that there's a person, like a live face, right, that you can call, you can talk to. I think that's I think that's important. I think that's important. If you have a problem, and I think it probably may offset some problems, right? That there's so much transparency and so much availability and access that's always a good thing. So thank you, Brianna, for your service.
Right. And I'd like to thank Brianna and for everybody for sharing here, because I think that is important that we discuss these and many other issues affecting our community to keep it in front and center, so that we know that they are priority issues that we need to stay on. And when we have these kinds of things, we can be energized off of other people's energy and the things that they have done, and so it helps all of us. So thank you all. Thank you. And Ruby, give me a call.
Yes, ma'am.
I love that. I love that. Well, I know you heard Brianna mention that the next voting conversation is on June 21st, so you can mark that on your calendar.
That's
and
my
that
birthday, people. It is my birthday. First day of summer, longest day of the year. That's right, June 21. And I'll be listening in on my birthday. How about that?
I love it. We will give you a special happy birthday shout out, Ruby Bailey, on June 21st at 6:30. And that voting conversation will be around access. So we'll be talking about access to voting with some more guests. So please join us, mark it on your calendar now, June 21st at 6:30. So thank you all, ladies, for joining us today. And we are signing off.
Hey, bye.